Yay. Okay. So thank you all for being here. Feel free to continue to introduce yourself in the chat. My name is Rob. I am the Director of Events and Marketing at PowerToFly. Use he, him pronouns based here in New York City. Want to thank you all for joining PowerToFly and Think Human today for our chat and learn on 10 key facts you should know about Juneteenth. We'll also be having a great Q&A discussion as well. So if you have questions for our speakers, start thinking of them and you can add those to the chat. Just want to briefly just hint on our code of conduct. We want to make sure we have a great conversation today as well. So I won't go all through all of this, but you can take a look there. And feel free to have your camera on, of course, to join in the fun. If you're not camera ready and want to keep that off, no problem. Also, if you have to duck out at any point, we will be sending a rewatch link within probably by tomorrow, so you can check that out. And it'll also be posted on our YouTube channel and on our site as well. And as I said, we really do want to hear from you. So if you have questions for our speakers, feel free to add those into the chat and we'll get to as many of those as possible, as well as the questions you added when you registered for the event as well. I'd love to introduce our first of our speakers, the amazing Beth Ruffin, our global DEIB consultant and trainer here at Power2Fly. Based in South Carolina, Beth has over 20 years of experience in corporate America, focused mostly on account management within the financial services industry. And Beth's superpower is creating safe spaces that make it easier to discuss difficult topics. I've seen her do it many times. So thank you so much, Beth, for being here today. And joining her in the conversation is LaToya Lin, who is the Senior Vice President of People at Vidmob. LaToya serves there with Vidmob, a leading AI-driven creative data platform for enterprise marketers. She has enhanced her expertise through executive coaching and artificial intelligence programs at Harvard University and MIT, and is also a senior member of the Forbes Human Resources Council and chief as well. So LaToya, we're going to be hearing from just a little bit in our Q&A session. But with that, I'm going to turn things over to you, Beth, to walk us through some of these facts that we should all know about Juneteenth.
Awesome. Thank you, Rob. And thanks everyone for being here. It's good to be here with you all. I'm Beth Ruffin. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. I am a middle-aged Black woman with my hair in a ponytail today. So as we get started, I want to just talk about language that you may be used to talking about Juneteenth and how slaves were freed. But the term slave actually denies the humanity of the person who was enslaved. And so you will hear me use the term enslaved persons. And I encourage you to update your language as well to move from slave to enslaved persons. So very briefly, let's talk about what Juneteenth is, and then I'll go into some facts about Juneteenth. So if you look at this timeline of history in American history, we know that the Civil War began in 1861, and in 1863, President Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation. The Civil War then ends in 1865. Unfortunately, what happened was after the signing of the Emancipation Proclamation, there were many sites where enslaved people did not know that this news came down. And so for another 2.5 years, people were still enslaved even after this Emancipation Proclamation was passed. And so on June 19th of 1865 is when in Galveston, Texas, troops entered and they alerted the enslaved people there that that the Emancipation Proclamation had passed, that slavery was no longer legal, and that they were free. We're going to come back to this fact because you may not know this, but enslavement actually did not end in 1865. We're going to come back to that. So Juneteenth, which occurs on June 19th, it is a day that acknowledges both the trauma as well as the freedom of Black people in the United States. If you see here, more than 250,000 Black people remained in enslavement for 2.5 years. And so that is why we celebrate June 19th. That is the basis of this holiday. So let's talk about some key facts here. And as I'm going through, as Rob mentioned, please put your questions in the chat because we want to have a lively discussion with you and answer any questions that you have. So number 10, the name of the holiday, Juneteenth, it's a blend of those two words, June and 19th. And you can see here the colors are red, yellow, and green, which you'll see in a lot of Afrocentric flags, a lot of materials, that those colors are consistent with this. Number 9, Texas actually became the first state to designate Juneteenth as a holiday, and that happened in 1980. So that's almost 100 years later that it was recognized as a holiday. And it makes sense that this happened in Texas because that, as I mentioned earlier, Galveston, Texas is where Juneteenth occurred on June 19th. Juneteenth then received federal recognition in 2021. So another 30 years, is my math right? 80 to 21? 40 years, another 40 years until this holiday was recognized on a federal level. Being introduced by a Democratic senator out of Massachusetts, passing unanimously through the Senate and with a wide margin through the House, and signed into law by President Biden on June 17th, 2021, making this a federally recognized holiday. This is Opal Lee, and she is called the grandmother of this movement because for 30 years, she petitioned that Juneteenth be made a federal holiday. And she even celebrated the signing of this in 2021 by walking at the age of 89 from her home in Fort Worth, Texas to Washington, D.C. So she's an extremely important figure, and you can see here on the screen that she was present during the signing of the federal holiday. Now, this holiday was first celebrated in 1866, actually, and there were church gatherings and celebratory gunfire in Texas. This is a picture that I pulled from the internet of what that first celebration looked like. Now let's talk a little bit about celebrating Juneteenth, and we're going to also cover this in the Q&A portion. But when you think about food for Juneteenth, there is a lot of focus around red foods, things like strawberry soda or red velvet cake, barbecue, and celebrations often feature readings of the Emancipation Proclamation, things like rodeos or fairs or cookouts, and some states even have Miss Juneteenth contests. This was really interesting because before I started researching for this event, I'd not heard this, but in some parts of Texas, former enslaved people would make an annual pilgrimage back to Galveston on Juneteenth because they associated that city with where emancipation was first announced. I think that's really cool. Now, I mentioned this earlier, but this is Black history that is not talked about a lot. Did you know that Juneteenth was actually not the end of enslavement? There is a genealogist that found evidence on 19 plantations in places like Louisiana that enslavement actually continued into the 1970s. If you want to look up, there's a specific case in Louisiana, Waterford Plantation, and the Black people there were indebted to the plantation's owner. And so they would work through the harvest and they would try to settle up for their debt. And they were always told, you didn't make it. There was a family that was interviewed, and there were 5 generations of people that were enslaved after the Emancipation Proclamation. So I think it's important that we celebrate Juneteenth, but we also want to keep in mind that this practice went on for another 100 years, and in some ways is still going on today. Now, this is an interesting one. You don't have to be Black to celebrate Juneteenth. And I'm going to tell you why, which is perhaps my favorite fact that I'm going to share with you today. It's because Juneteenth is American history. I've talked with people, and there is a misconception that this is only a Black holiday, that this is only for Black people, but that's not true. This is a part of American history. Therefore, this is a holiday that we all can celebrate in, we all can remember, we all can take part in if we do it the right way, which we'll talk about through the Q&A. But I think this is really important for us to remember and to ingest is that Juneteenth, like all of Black history, is American history. So I want to get through this portion fairly quickly because I think the meat of this conversation is going to be in the Q&A. So Rob, I'm going to turn things back over to you so that we can get the Q&A facilitated.
Thank you so much, Beth. That was so interesting. Yeah, I had no idea about the pilgrimages, especially. So that is a really interesting fact. And I know we're going to hear a lot more now, and love to bring LaToya into the conversation as well. Thank you so much for being here. And yeah, just kind of wanted to kind of kick things off with a question for both of you, because this is Pride Month, PowerToFly. We have our big Pride Summit at the end of the year. I'm part of the LGBT community, so this is a month that means a lot to me. And we know that a lot of companies are hosting Pride Month programming, which, of course, is really great. But Juneteenth programming is still a lot more rare. Beth, we were talking offline before we started that not even every company has the day off yet, even though this is a federal holiday. So I'm just wondering from both of you, why do you think this is, and what should companies do about that?
Hi, I can jump in. First of all, Beth, that was a great presentation. I learned so much actually in this. So thank you so much for putting that together. And hello to everybody who's viewing. Hi. I'm in Brooklyn. Well, no, I live in Brooklyn, but I'm in New York City. So if anyone who is my neighbor, hello, and far away, how are you? On your question, Rob, it's such an interesting question. When you think about, everyone associates, and just to kind of share, my pronouns are she, her, they, them. And I am obviously Black, queer, cisgendered female. And what's amazing about, what my company is doing at Vidmob is that we're actually doing a Pride party and Juneteenth Pride party. And what we're doing is we are doing and I'm actually going to write a post about it on my LinkedIn. I think I dropped my LinkedIn in there so you can kind of share what we're doing. We're doing a Pride party at a Black-owned bar, and the proceeds will be going to the Marsha BJ funding, the first trans woman to start the revolution of Pride, to her foundation. So it's like it's all connected. So like we're supporting a Black business, we're supporting being gay and Pride, and everyone's coming, all the allies, all the leaders are coming, and also we're going to be donating to a very important cause for trans youth nationwide, which are endangered every moment of the day. So we are combining it all together. You don't have to do all of those things, to really celebrate, acknowledge it, even in conversation, even in your resource groups, or even like just when you connect them with your small company, kind of coming together. But they, Pride and Juneteenth kind of go hand in hand in so many ways. because, rights, freedoms, all those different things. But, Pride really started in New York City at Stonewall by a Black transgendered woman. And then her ancestors, endued with Juneteenth and having that situation, this whole process. So it's all connected. So try to combine it is what I'm sharing. Because it is already intertwined.
I love that. Yeah, anything that you wanted to add to that too, Beth, in terms of why this day is not being as widely recognized?
Yeah, I want to echo what LaToya said about, I think it's really interesting when people try to pit different oppressed groups against each other. It's like we have to find our focus. We can't focus on all of these, but like LaToya mentioned, there are Black people who are gay, right? And so LaToya raised her hand. And so it's really important to understand intersectionality and how our identities are woven together with the experiences that we have. But I do think that there's not as much focus because people are trying to figure out, how do we celebrate this? What does it mean? Or they're thinking this really only impacts the Black people on my team, and there aren't that many people. So I don't know if this needs to be a full holiday. And so I really just encourage people to think about Juneteenth as American history and not just Black history.
Yeah, no, I love that. I think that was so impactful that you ended your list with that point, Beth, because I think that's something that we can really drive home today in this conversation, in this event, is that this really is American history. Yeah, go ahead.
I also wanted to say, we call Juneteenth Black Freedom Day, and that's because on July 4th, 1776, Black people were not free. And so if you want to think about celebrating independence, you need to have both in tandem. You need to have the day when white Americans experienced freedom from Britain, but you also need to celebrate the day that Black Americans experienced freedom from enslavement.
I'll add to that. I think, I was invited a few years ago to my first Juneteenth party, and it was kind of a big deal. It was like a year in advance notice. We all went to DC, the DC area. It was a big barbecue. We had, a petting zoo and a jumpy house for the kids. And they invited everyone, family from near and far, neighbors from near and far, and friends. And we all got together, and it was really like a celebration of this very dark time in our history, where we want to acknowledge that like pivotal moment, right? What we deem to be that pivotal moment, although as you can share and seen in Beth's presentation, it's far from over. But that moment, and to come, and also there were a lot of abolish people, or like white people, that were a part of this movement as well, right? That fought against this. And thought that, and believed to their core that this was not what we should be doing. So when you think about this is, this has had an impact on, Black Americans, but also there was a lot of white Americans that also participated in making this change in so many ways, from a grassroots standpoint. I think, noting the Quakers, I mean, they're biggest, in history of being a part of this change. So, and people of European descent. And it is a moment to come back to saying, like, yeah, we had each other's back. We wanted to do something different. We wanted a different type of America. And, I always say, like, the only change that we would want to see in this world is if everyone works together to make that happen. So that's why it's an American holiday from my viewpoint.
No, I think that makes so much sense. And I love that you were saying about the event you went to, where was this celebratory thing, because that's also connecting it to Pride for me, because over time Pride has become this great celebratory event. But as you were saying, LaToya, it started with Marsha and Sylvia Rivera, because at Stonewall, because these people we were being oppressed. And sometimes we lose sight that it all started with a riot to begin with, because of this and it's kind of become a celebration. And I think like that's where we see how Pride and Juneteenth do have this link to each other, because there is this dark history, but at the same time it's celebratory at the same time. And I think so much of us with both Pride and Juneteenth, I think we're kind of finding the balance there in how we're showing it, especially in corporate America as well.
Shout out to Sylvia Rivera. Shout out to all the Latinx people on the call. And I mean, just, if anyone has never heard about that story, Marsha P. Johnson, Sylvia Rivera, I'm a New York kid. My sister-in-law recently called me an old gay. Because I used to be in Christopher Street and in those areas back in the early 2000s. So, shout out to that community. And there are still people out there still keeping that community alive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And let's talk about examples of how organizations have integrated Juneteenth into their DEI initiatives. Because one thing I want to be wary of, and as kind of going back to this point where this is an American holiday, not a Black holiday, sometimes I get worried that, we're going to put the emphasis just on our Black employees to organize these events and and put everything on their shoulders. So I'm wondering, what are examples that you have both seen, and LaToya, you were already talking about some stuff that you all are working on, but how have you integrated Juneteenth into DEI initiatives? And also I'm adding to that, like, how do we make sure that the work is fair across the board to who is actually has that burden of planning those initiatives?
I can start. I think in order to answer this question, we need to first talk about how not to celebrate. And so when you're thinking about celebration and things like allyship, we want to make sure that you are being meaningful and that it's celebrating freedom, but that you're also advancing the rights of Black people, because Black people are still oppressed in this country. And so I want to talk about two examples. One was Walmart. A couple of years ago, they had a Celebrate Juneteenth ice cream. And I can't see what flavors it was, but the packaging was, red, black, and I think it might have been red velvet or something. That's not celebrating Juneteenth, right? That is marketing to get more people to buy your product. Bath and Body Works did something similar where they had a unity collection of candles and scents. But again, I want to know, what are they doing as corporations to celebrate and advance the freedom of Black people? So let's talk about some ways you can do that. One is you make it a paid holiday. You allow people to take that day off to celebrate in their own way. If that's not an option, you make it a company-wide day of education and activism. So you encourage employees to clear their meetings and spend the day engaging meaningfully with Black history. Another way is participating in different initiatives. And we're going to send out some resources after this, but there's something that Autodesk did called the Recover Stronger Initiative. And those are things that you can do to show your commitment externally to celebrate the day.
Plus one to everything Beth has shared. At Vidmob, it is a paid holiday that everyone takes. Even if you're global and you celebrate that day, you can take that day off. It's recognized federally in America, probably not recognized in other countries, and we acknowledge that if people want to take that day, they can. We're also, again, like I mentioned, we are having a party to celebrate that. So I don't know if we're going to do red foods or barbecue. Although, man, I wish that we were doing that. I love a good barbecue. But we are going to be spending time with each other and celebrating. And we also have a ton of new hires coming in from all different backgrounds that are actually going to join us on that day if they can make it, so they can kind of learn our culture and who we are as people. So I think for the most part, strategically, organizations are mostly led by the people, right? And this is my role in HR. People shape the culture. People, have different backgrounds and heritage and things like that. And what's amazing about that is, as a corporation or as a company, if you provide the space for people to do that, then these things will manifest. This was not done by my department, by the way. This was organized by another department, Black at Vidmob, Pride at Vidmob, and we have like a foundation that we have that can, from pledge that we can kind of give, proceeds to, and all those, different things. And they kind of led it and asked us, our opinion, on how to like approach it and what to do. And, that's what we did. We just created the space. So if you don't have funding, because not every company has money to do like things, but if you have the space to do it, then yes, go for it.
Yeah, no, I love that. And I think someone was mentioning something about funding before in the chat as well. And I think there's great community organizations as well that you can tap into as well. But that's making me think of another question, LaToya, that I wanted to throw to you, which is, how can companies empower non-Black employees to engage more and support their community in the workplace? One thing this is making me think of, because you were mentioning some of the employee resource groups, uh, and sometimes I think companies have a difficult balance where we want to make sure that the represented group has the dominant voice, but to also bring in allies as well, make sure that they're part of the conversation.
I don't know if I'll be controversial with this one. I think I think what can, from my non people of color colleagues, right? I think that what I noticed, especially during like this whole George Floyd thing, and is that, should I say something? I don't know if I have the I'm not that person. I don't want to say the wrong thing. And I understand that in like great compassion, because you don't want to say it because you've held, maybe like I've been holding to a space, maybe I have to step back or things like that. And my advice to people that are of, white heritage, I remember I did a what Think Human actually was like, real conversations with Black people, and like we just had this talk, and I did a meditation at the end. We had like over like maybe like 1,500 people listening on this thing. That's when everybody was like connected to Zoom, and the Zoom stock was very high. And there was a moment where I said, some of us, our ancestors, are very proud that we have come this far. Then there's some of us who are not proud of what our ancestors might have done. And this is the time for you to change that, right? So I also just want people to also balance that with what happened in what your ancestors might have done, you are not interested in doing. And in fact, actually, you're going to correct it, right? That's why every generation is so great, right? They always try to move humanity forward in a more positive way. And every one of us has an opportunity. So going back to your question, Rob, what people can do, I just be in that space, and go to someone and say, I really don't know enough, but I'm trying these like 3 things, or I'm trying to understand these facts. And that in itself is a gesture of improvement, as opposed to going into fear and be like, well, I'm not going to say anything because I don't want to take up space or seem. And if you are taking up space and someone tells you that you are, then you can kind of say, oh, I didn't really mean to, because we're all trying, right? This is all about creating a safe and vulnerable space for us to grow. And I think there's a book out there, I think it's called like White Guilt or something like that, that kind of speaks to it. I gotta find the book, but it's something like that. Like, don't feel that way. Feel passionate about wanting to change and feel passionate about wanting to learn more. And you don't know what you don't know, and that's fine. But also being like, I don't know what I don't know, but I want to learn because I owe it to my ancestors who didn't do the best that they were supposed to do to be something different.
I'm curious, LaToya, what's your thoughts on for that person who wants to learn more? Should they start by looking online before they go to a person, or like, because I don't want to I guess we're thinking to overburden, essentially our Black employees with like, oh, let me ask you all these questions when some of that stuff lives on Google.
Yeah, well, listen, totally. I mean, start with that, right? And some people of color are open to having these discussions. Some people are not. Just like how you're trying to understand someone's pronoun and make sure you're saying it correct, you never really know, but until you kind of get corrected, then you go, okay, this is what it is. I would use the same energy around like, does this person want to engage in this conversation or not? I don't want to make the assumption that no person of color does not want to, but I think there's a lot of us that are not interested in doing that because it's very labor intensive. And also we didn't create the systems that oppressed our ancestor and us today. So it's very hard. Like we can say like, here's my experience on how to navigate it, but I don't really know my experience on like how to fix it. It's actually like a team effort, right? And it starts with letting you know how I feel and what you can do as a person of privilege to kind of change that. But at the same time, like there is more. The point is there is more grace in this situation than one could imagine or can think, and we're in it together, and I think that's the first step.
Yeah, I think sometimes we're corrupted by social media, news
Social media corrupts
mentality.
people.
Huh? Oh.
Social media corrupts people. I didn't know that happened.
It's a new announcement. But actually, this leads great into a question that we got in the chat that I'll send over to you, Beth, because Tanalise was asking, what is the best way to support a Black employee who has fatigue from answering questions about Black employees or Juneteenth?
Yeah, I think this connects with what LaToya was saying, that encouraging people to find education that already exists, and even perhaps having resources available that they can go to in order to get that education. And then I think also empowering the Black employees that it's okay if you don't want to carry this burden. It's okay if you don't want to talk about this, and standing behind them when they refuse, if they say, I'm not going to do that, right? Because a lot of times if someone is in an organization where there are not a lot of people who look like them, there will be the fear, right, of being labeled, right? They're hard to work with because they won't answer my questions, right? Or there's going to be some sort of retribution because they weren't as helpful with me as it came to Black culture. And so I think as a leader, you have to give them the permission to take their rest. And you also need to stand behind them to ensure that there are no negative consequences for that, while also providing resources to other people so that, hey, why don't you try this instead?
I love that. And I've also heard, some of the companies that we work with too provide compensation to employee resource groups who might be organizing events like a Juneteenth celebration. Not just the money to put on the celebration, but to those workers who are basically doing another job on top of their job. In some cases, I've even seen people take a whole quarters off from like their full-time responsibilities to really invest in the employee resource group, and then they come back after that and it changes off with someone else. So there's lots of ways there to kind of relieve the burden on just one person or one group there. And I'd love to kind of also ask you both about Suzanne's question, because LaToya, you touched on some of this, but Suzanne was asking, how would you recommend a completely virtual employee population celebrate Juneteenth? My company recognizes Juneteenth as a holiday in the US. So either of you kind of want to comment, since now we're in a increasingly virtual or hybrid world, to acknowledge these holidays?
Yeah, I think virtually, you can make it happen. I think having like panel speakers come, I think, having, presentations, I think having a nice Q&A, would be really great, and create experience. It's always great to kind of, one of my favorite things I did many years ago in college, which was 2 years ago, if anyone's counting, um, just last summer. Um, I remember doing a like celebration of like Black industry people in comedies. So I did like, and I'm gonna say my age, in Living Color snippets, Martin, Living Single, which was the original Friends. Um, and sharing that with people and kind of celebrating like how that has contributed to America, and culture. And I think that in itself is that it is very helpful to do things virtually, like showing like clips or snippets. You can do so many things to acknowledge that. Great question.
I think also something that I heard about a lot of companies doing during COVID is they would do virtual interactive events. So some, maybe you want to do a cooking, right? Where people are preparing some classic foods that could be part of the celebration. And you have an instructor, you tell people what ingredients to get. You have an instructor virtually who is walking through, and you're cooking together, celebrating together. Maybe you're doing a craft or something like that. So think about what are the ways that you would celebrate in person, and how can you move those to virtual by providing materials and or an instructor.
I love that. I love that. And yeah, and I love just sharing clips. And yeah, I think these are all great. And we just yesterday we're a fully remote company here at PowerToFly. We had an org call where we walked through a deck on Juneteenth, and we have so many international folks that and I wanted to be the other way around too. I want to hear about holidays in other countries that I don't know about as well. So definitely is a two-way street in that regard. And so, of course, we're talking a lot about Juneteenth, but we also want to talk about how we're supporting our Black employees, and also talking about Black history throughout the year as well. So, aside from just, learning the key facts about Juneteenth, how do we show up and really demonstrate our support throughout the year? I think, again, I think, another thing that ties it even back to Pride. We see all the rainbows in June, right? And then July 1st comes around and those rainbows go away. But at the same time, the struggles remain for all 365 days of the year. So how do we really show that support beyond just June 19th?
I actually want to put that back question to the audience. We have a lot of people that are not people of color, right? And I would love to see in the chat, like, what would you do, right? How can you all lend your support? I can tell you how it would make me feel: heard, seen, value, love, connected, right? So we'll be the recipient, and I'm speaking for Beth on this one as well. We'll be the recipients of that support. But I would love to see in the chat how people would lend that support. Like, what would you do? Some good. Let's see.
We'll let them type for
Let them type.
I know someone earlier mentioned supporting Black businesses, so that's an amazing way.
Yeah, actually, someone just put that. Katie just put that in there. So links to her favorite Black-owned businesses and companies.
Great. Encouraging a lot of people, first language. Yeah, yep. Let each other correct it, and to correct it keeps empathy in front. I love that. That's absolutely wonderful. Putting us celebrating Black experiences this fall. Fab. Thank you, Amy. That sounds fab.
Yeah, and
So
here at PowerToFly, I was just going to say we have an ongoing chat and learn series called Pride all year long. So we are trying to, not just do our Pride events in June, but really making sure that we're having LGBTQIA plus speakers all year long. And, definitely when you're looking at your speakers, I think, Beth, you mentioned intersectionality before. If you're doing an event on veterans, for example, in November, are you incorporating Black veterans into that? Because that's also a very different experience than maybe a white veteran or military spouse might be having in that. So just keeping that, I think, intersectionality at the front of your mind.
I love that. I love what Jen wrote as well. That's really cool. Like meet the team member.
Mm-hmm.
So the reason why I put this question back out to the audience is because, when a question like that is asked, I almost wonder, like, how can I be supported? I mean, there's so many ways to be, but I think it's more important for people to understand how it makes us feel, right? Because I think that seeing these things, I feel happy. I feel very thankful for the people that are receiving this, these experiences, and people leaning in. And yeah, it's great. That's what people want to do. And I think that's where allyship really comes into play, is that you want to do something that is meaningful to another person. And although you are not connected to that, you're not a part of that group, you are affiliated, or you're an ally to that group or people, and you want to be able to stand up for that. So all of these things that is being shared here that are being typed are just really great tips. So I was able to answer that question by having someone else answer. I don't know
Awesome.
if you can add anything to that.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, I always like to think about an answer to the question like this in terms of where are you spending your time, your treasure, your money, and your talent, right? Because that's really going to show where your heart is. So, are you spending time throughout the year learning about different experiences that people have had in this country? Where are you spending your money? And not just are you spending your money with Black businesses or with gay-owned businesses, but are you spending your money with businesses that actually don't advocate or are harmful to those populations, right? And how are you using this information to help inform others? It could be as simple as at the Thanksgiving table. You hear someone say something and you're like, you know what, that's not right. And we're not going to tolerate that language anymore, right? So it's in those little things too of how are you spending your time, your treasure, and your talent? And how are you advocating when nobody Black is around? Are you still that ally and that advocate?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I love also what Dr. P just added into the chat, which is they've been helpful to their organization to create a repository that houses all things educational, so learning engagement occurs year round. I love that. So if you have like an intranet or something like that where you can continually put articles in, or if you have a Slack channel perhaps that's dedicated to that, that also kind of speaks to the remote or large companies that might be global in that way, so everyone can tap into that one resource. A great question here, because a lot of this is great, but a lot of people always talk about kind of that leadership buy-in. So that was what someone was asking, is how do you create buy-in with your business leaders to speak out and support holidays at Juneteenth? We know that change often starts at the top there. So how would either of you recommend getting that leadership buy-in if there's maybe a hesitancy there for whatever reason?
Someone will always listen. I hate buy-in because it's like, if it's a good leader's job is to listen to their people. And a good leader's job is to ensure that the voices that are not always dominant are being heard. And a good leader's, when people are saying, like, I want to do something so a group can feel heard or valued or seen, is critical, right? And if they don't do that, right, and it's not important to them, then you have to decide on, like, do you want to be a part of this organization, right? So that's actually kind of where things go. I think I was talking with, I did another podcast thing yesterday. And I said, people only leave a job for three reasons only three reasons. You ready? They mentally can't do the job anymore. The work has become hard, right? Two, they physically can't do the job anymore for whatever reason, right? Maybe the commute, whether it's that, whether it's actually you can't lift anymore, whatever, right? The third and most important reason where I think this fits in this category is it is not morally aligned, intrinsically aligned with their integrity, right? So if you work for a company that does not hit those buttons for you, especially the intrinsic one, then that's why.
Yeah, we just ran our what diverse talent wants in 2024 survey, and someone was saying, "Oh, it's rarely about money," and I think you're dead on, LaToya. Like,
Never about money.
yeah, 80%
Sometimes
of
it is.
respondents who responded to us are actually actively considering new roles this year. 80% of people who responded. So for all the talent managers who are out listening to this right now, as well as the people who are actively looking for roles, I think what you're saying is makes so much sense. And I think so much of that awakening that we had during the pandemic, especially about, oh, I really want to work where I feel a moral connection to the mission, is still going very strong.
I wanted to add that so I've been doing this work for about a decade now. And when I first started, I used to really talk about the business case for DEI. It makes good business sense. There are these reports that say you have greater innovation and greater profit and employee engagement and all of that. But I read this article a couple of years ago in the Wall Street Journal. I'll try to find the link to put it in the chat. And it talked about why we should think about moving away from the business case, because essentially, if someone is saying, tell me why this is important, you are saying to me, tell me why I need to consider you. Tell me why I need to see you. Tell me why I need to make sure that you have an equitable opportunity. And like someone said earlier, don't work for leaders who don't see you. It's fatiguing. It's exhausting trying to convince people to see you and to value you. And so if anything, I think it shouldn't be the Black people that are doing this advocating work. It should be the allies that should be speaking up. Or, as LaToya mentioned, maybe that's not the place for you if you have to go through the hoops of convincing someone why this work is important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, lots of agreement coming in the chat there as well. So that is great. We're almost running. We got about 10 minutes left. So if you have a question for Beth or LaToya, feel free to put it into the chat, and we will work on trying to get that. So I'm just looking at our other questions. Any kind of I know we're going to share, as you mentioned, Beth, some overall resources with folks in our follow-up emails, but any immediate resources that either of you that come to mind in terms of podcast or books or a documentary or anything that you would say, oh, this is a good starting place to learn more about Juneteenth?
I mean, nothing comes to mind specifically about Juneteenth, the intersectionality, how it connects to Pride. I think we're still creating that. I think we're at a place where it's factual. The data there is a lot of information out there. So I would suggest people go to the Google and type in like histories, there's videos, there's lots of talks. I had the privilege of on Juneteenth going to the museum in DC, like on that day, and just feeling that energy of that. So again, there is tons of things you can kind of search in the web about it and, learn, but I don't have anything that's very specific that comes to mind. I don't know, Beth, if you probably a bit more versed on that besides your great presentation that you put together earlier today.
I appreciate that. I put some stuff in the chat. So PowerToFly has a toolkit. There's also a website, Juneteenth.com. And then speaking of the National Museum of African American History and Culture, they have a toolkit as well. So those are some really good places to start.
No, just check those out. We're definitely going to send some of that along with the recording from today. So if you want to dive in more, that will be great. I had a question that just came in from someone. They said, I think at my company, we want to acknowledge Juneteenth and educate about the importance. However, we don't want to do anything that could be offensive. We worry about the optics about a non-Black person leading a presentation or something similar. What are your thoughts, or do you have any advice on that?
Ooh, can I start this one? Okay. My first question is, do you not have any Black people that are able to lead the presentation or lead the work? And if the answer is no, then that's a deeper issue, right? That you don't have that resource on your team. The second thing I will say is you have to be very cautious about getting into analysis paralysis. So many people don't even start the work because they're afraid of making mistakes. So let me free you. You're going to make mistakes. You're not going to get everything right. I'm still making mistakes 10 years in this industry, right? In this career. The difference is, are you being genuine? Are you being authentic? And how are you recovering from mistakes? So if somebody calls you out and says, hey, I just want to let you know that that wasn't, done the right way. How are you responding to that? Are you getting defensive? Like, well, or are you truly listening to that feedback and adjusting as you go? So those would be my two things. Why do you not have anyone that can lead the work? And then understand that you're going to make mistakes. The important thing is, how do you recover from those mistakes? I do want to call out, Crystal made a comment and said, as one of 4 Black employees in my company, it gets exhausting leading the work. And sometimes I want others to lead. And so, think about, if it's not internally, externally, can you partner with a company like PowerToFly, right? How can you partner with different organizations to help do that so you're not putting that burden on your people?
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, PowerToFly, Think Human, and there's lots of other great nonprofit organizations out there. Thank you so much. And I'm just curious too about kind of a lot of these questions are also making me think about feedback. What are some ways that either of you would recommend getting feedback from employees on how a company is approaching Juneteenth, or maybe how they're supporting Black employees as a whole? Because giving feedback is a tricky thing. Sometimes people are afraid, oh my God, if I say the wrong thing, this could affect my employment in some way. Or, who am I giving feedback up to? My manager? That can be difficult as well. So any suggestions in terms of giving feedback about how a company might be approaching Juneteenth or supporting their Black employees as a whole?
Do your surveys. It's helpful. And also relationships. People can tend to open up when they have good relationships with people, but if you don't have that, and shout out to the one of 4 people of color, that are in an organization. Listen, it's like that. I'm the only Black career executive for the past maybe 5 or 6 years, in my career. Right? There's always one, but then we multiply. Right? You always gotta see. I always say, if there's 4 there and someone comes into the organization as a 5th and they see you, you've already kind of, there. So we have sometimes we get exhausted, but we always have to remember
I know.
Started with 1, right? And then 2, then 3, then 4, and we support each other. But the way to do that is you can do it through your surveys. I usually cut my surveys through diversity. So I ask the same question and see how Black people respond: Latinx, whites, male, female, non-gender conforming, to see how they kind of like interact with the same question, and to see if there's a significant, connection. And then that's when I see like there's an issue. So that's one way to do it. But if you can't speak to anyone in your organization, usually, I don't know, we're in a world where CEOs listen to everybody. Roll up to them and say, I want to be able to be a part of a change. And here we are.
I'll also add that make sure that you're checking in before you plan something. Because the best way, there's this quote that I like to use, it's nothing for us without us. So who's at the table when you're planning, or whose input have you gotten? And so I put some questions in the chat that you could ask your Black employees, even when you want to plan something. What would you like to see that furthers Black engagement at this org? How can we celebrate our Black employees in a meaningful and authentic way? How can we incorporate Black history more into our culture? And you can use this for your LGBTQIA plus employees, for your AAPI and Latinx, right? You can use these questions for any marginalized group, but ensure that you are getting that input before you plan the output.
I love that. Well, I think a lot of people got some amazing input today from both of you. So thank you so much for Beth for starting us off with those great 10 facts, and LaToya for all of your insights today. Just going to launch a little quick poll here just to let us know if you want to hear more from PowerToFly and Think Human. We're both here to be your partner in all things DEI. As I said, we are going to share the recording for this, so that should be landing in your inbox sometime tomorrow. So if you want to revisit any of these insights, which I'm sure you will want to do, that will be in there along with a bunch of other resources that we're going to share as well. And of course, if you have questions for us, just let us know, respond in that email. And thank you all so much for your time today. I hope you do have a great Juneteenth next week, a great rest of your Pride Month for the rest of June, and we'll be back with lots more programming here at PowerToFly. So thank you again for spending your Wednesday morning or afternoon or evening with us, wherever you are in the world, and we'll see you all again soon. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye,
Thanks.
everybody.
Bye.